Tasmania is the full stop at the bottom of the world, and we live on an island of stories. For years now, the Tamar Valley Writers Festival has celebrated our great thinkers, writers and readers, and now we're excited to share these insights globally. I'm Lyndon Riggall, and throughout this series, my colleague Annie Warburton and I will be talking to writers, playwrights, comedians, poets, editors, and all of those who share a love of the written word, right here on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast. Dylan Hesp is a comedy stand-up performer, writer and actor whose best-known work includes starring in ABC TV's Sando and his smash hit YouTube series created with assistance from Screen Tasmania and Screen Australia, Australia's Best Street Racer. Street Racer is the story of Taylor James, a young man trying to crack the big time in the Tasmanian late-night racing scene, one block at a time, and all from behind the wheel of his mum's 1994 Holden Barina. Working alongside his creative partner Michael O'Neill, Dylan continues to develop multi-platform projects that explore our island's lovable losers and which take audiences by surprise as they transcend laughter to touch the heart as well. In this episode of the podcast, Dylan and I discuss his love of laughter, street racing culture, the Tasmanian sense of humour, and the secrets to crafting comedy. Dylan Hesp, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lyndon.
So I guess I want to start at the beginning with you, and I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about where your love of comedy came from.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think for me, I definitely grew up watching a lot of comedy with my parents, which is really important. So a lot of British comedy and a lot of Steve Martin, a lot of Martin Short, that kind of thing. So I was always very lucky to have that kind of exposure to comedy and a kind of variety of it, I guess. But I think probably one of the key things I remember, and my mum often talks about it, is kind of from like a very early age, I would impersonate people. But whereas, you know, some people impersonate like famous people, like I wasn't at home trying to be Billy Connolly or whatever. I was like, we would go to the supermarket or visit a family friend and I would kind of come home pretending to be them in the car. I would be doing their voice and their mannerisms, mainly to kind of make my mum or my dad laugh at that age. My sister probably wouldn't laugh. So I think it kind of started as that, and then naturally as I started to get a bit older, I kind of started doing more drama and things like that at school, which was kind of a fun way to be able to, you know, kind of I guess explore the kind of performing side. And then around kind of probably about the age of 11 and 12, I kind of realised that it was actually a part of the writing that I really loved, not just the performing. And I think the whole thing is quite a symbiotic relationship between, you know, all kind of elements of what I do. But around that age particularly, you know, suddenly video cameras were a thing and my mate had, you know, one of those colourful iMacs and iMovie. So it was like, oh man, we can actually like make a story, as opposed to kind of when we very first started, you'd literally have to shoot it all in sequence, plug it into the TV and then sit there and watch this, you know, catastrophe of a short film or something. So it kind of, went from a very natural place to kind of starting to do some of that stuff.
And what did some of those early home movie sketches look like?
Oh, that's a good question. It was mostly a lot of parody at that time, and sometimes I kind of work with young people and getting started in comedy and stuff like that. And parody is a really great way to do that because it's kind of taking something you're familiar with and then, you know, spoofing it. So, and I loved that at the time. I was watching films like Flying High and Top Secret and stupid movies like that, Scary Movie, and being at that perfect Austin Powers age as well, I was very like, yeah, okay, I get what a parody is now. So I remember doing one that was like a parody of David Attenborough, and then there was a lot of, you know, even the kind of fake TV in the sense of like a TV reporter or kind of, you know, what I'm saying is I did Charlie Pickering's job at age 11, so.
And so these characters that you've developed, and we'll get to some of them a bit more in a minute. These characters that you've developed, do you always have a real world basis for them?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah.
Are you to happy? A certain degree, yeah.
Are you happy without obviously breaking anyone's heart as they realise that they're one of your famous comedy characters? Are you happy to talk about kind of the features that you have found in people to mimic and impersonate?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think most of the characters I've created or co-created, they're mostly an amalgamation of people. So that's where I go, like there is some of that in people. But there is also, I'm aware, like, I hope I'm not a hack, but there is definitely like, some of the characters are similar in the sense that they kind of operate in the same wheelhouse. So for example, I never really play heroes. They never have great skills, and they often have overinflated ideas of themselves. Do you know what I mean? So like for a character, and we can talk more about it later, but like a character like Australia's Best Street Racer, he is incredibly naive, which a lot of my characters are. But in him, that naivety means that he doesn't realise he can't do the things he wants to do. And that's also a part that kind of comes through from real people. So I'm not always, sometimes it's like, I see a lot of dads that when their kids leave home, they suddenly don't know what to do with their lives. Like, so that kind of becomes a dad character that I do or something. But the other side of it as well is kind of looking at some of the emotional stuff of what's going on for people. And one of the rules I often use is about, and you know, it's really helpful in writing, is what a character wants isn't always what they need. And so I try to always create a character that when you look at them, maybe at first it's like, oh, it's funny, they're in a funny situation, funny, they're saying jokes, but then slowly you start to realise that the real comedy is coming from them not getting what they need. And I think for me, the word I always come back to is empathy, is that I hope that people would watch the characters and not go, oh yeah, making fun of dad, but you actually empathise for their situation. And, you know, like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to change the world through comedy. But I think if I could encourage people to be more empathetic towards one another through silly characters, then that would be a win. But at the end of the day, I'm just pretty stoked if people laugh. So,
do you think that this disconnect between what characters want and what they need, and watching them strive for something that we know is in the wrong direction, do you think that's what we find funny in a lot of your work and in comedy in general?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, comedy is an interesting thing to describe. Like when you talk about like, how do you explain what comedy is? Because often there's a lot of ways that we describe it. Like we might say, comedy is something we don't expect, or comedy is turning left instead of turning right. And all those things are true, but they're often true of drama and horror and thriller as well. So I think for me, when it comes to writing characters, usually one of the key things that separates comedy is that, you know, like, they're not always people we want to be, but they are us, if that makes sense. And they're often like people with an amazing goal, but they don't have the skills or the talent or whatever they need to get it, but they never give up hope. Do you know what I mean? And that's part of it, I think, and that's always something I think that I try to push through in some of the characters I work with, is because in a drama, like, or even in real life, or, you know, like you would maybe give up, but often comedy characters don't, because they're so relentless. And I think what you're kind of hinting at is, I think definitely it's that conflict of like, sometimes you're watching it, and that's, I think, sometimes where the cringe element comes in too, especially in things like The Office and stuff, is where you're going, just please stop, like, just don't, you're hurting yourself. But the thing is, comedy tells the truth, whereas drama doesn't, and we often do that ourselves. We keep going after something when it's like, dude, you don't have a chance.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Australia's Best Street Racer. Let's talk about Taylor.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk me through that process of what we see him wanting and what he needs, and talk through his character design a little bit? Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what's kind of interesting about that character is if you come back to the brass tacks of it, and like the context is he's, you know, an 18-year-old kid, he's just got his license, he's in his mum's car, he wants to soup it up, and he wants to drive around in blockies around the Launceston CBD, like a lot of people in regional areas do. And so I guess with him, the dynamic is that when we meet the character, it's very clear that what he wants is to be Australia's best street racer. Like, you know, he wants to be a drifter. Throughout the series, for those who watch it, there's often jokes alluding to the fact of maybe part of that is because of his dad's legacy in his life, and he's got this overinflated opinion of his dad. Like, he probably thinks his dad's won Bathurst, but his dad's probably, you know, went to McDonald's drive-through a couple of times at 1 a.m. Like, there's no actual evidence that his dad was a street racer, but he picks that up. But obviously, he is a classic character in the sense of, even though he wants to be Australia's best street racer, what he absolutely wants and what he needs, but he probably wouldn't admit it to himself, is that he just wants to fit in. He just wants some friends. And I think what you're talking about with the want and the need, the conflict of that, where it makes Street Racer funny is you go, dude, why don't you just pick something you are talented at, and I'm sure you could make friends. Like, go join Scouts, or take up anything else other than what you're doing, because it's obviously not working for you. But he is, as I think as people we often do, we don't know what we need, but we all want to belong. You know, we all want mates, and he's searching for that. So he's gone,
It's almost like, this is my first idea. I'm going to go hard at this. But because he's a comedic character, maybe he doesn't give up when he should do.
He sort of goes too hard.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really intrigued by, because watching Taylor, you also feel quite sorry for him.
Yeah.
And he's quite likeable in how hard he is trying. What are your feelings of him as a character outside of whether or not he's funny?
Yeah, okay. I think the fact that you feel sorry for him, I think is great, because we did that on purpose. So, that's not by accident. But at the same time, we didn't write him to be pathetic. And I think that's something really important with comedic characters, because you can go, they can struggle and it can be a bit sad. But like you said, if Taylor wasn't a hopeful character, then the show would be depressing. You'd be like, why do I want to watch 8 episodes about a guy who fails every time? Do you know what I mean? But I think the fact that he is a bit sad, I think is great, because I kind of feel like you come at the series maybe as someone in the audience and you go, I want to watch it. And I think our hope in creating it is that people would be surprised into caring for him. Like, you would get to the end and you'd go, I actually did really want him to succeed. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the other things I'm interested in is the culture of street racing in itself, and why you were drawn to that as a topic. Because obviously you can create a kind of buffoonish character around lots of things. But how did street racing call to you?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. So obviously the show is set in Launceston, but we don't really ever make a big deal about that it's Launceston, the idea being that it could be anywhere. So if you live in Newcastle, it could be your regional centre. But for myself and my co-creator, Michael O'Neill, we had been shooting like sketches for my YouTube channel and Facebook page and stuff like that. And at that point in time, we were a bit younger at this point, and you just at times kind of going, you just want to capture an idea. And we'd literally just been driving one night, and I think it was probably something like someone hooned past us on the blocky route, and we were going, there is something unique about that. But I guess where then the angle started to come in is if we went, let's shoot something improvised. And so what we did is we went around the blocky route in Michael's old Daewoo and shot what would eventually become what we kind of consider the pilot. Like, it was something that isn't a part of the series today, but it helped shape what it looked like. And we kind of went around and we were filming some stuff, and then we came to this car park. And I think one of the best things in writing and creating comedy or any kind of content is embracing your limitations. And we went, like, we don't have any other cars, we don't have any other actors. And through that, we suddenly started to go, wouldn't it be way funnier if, rather than him hanging out with people, the entire thing is about how he wants to hang out with people, but he doesn't have anyone to hang out with. But the reason that's funny, because that's, on that level, that's sad. But the reason it's funny is, wait a second, you have a hopeful, naive character who, no matter what, is like, oh yeah, they're coming. The guys will be here soon. And that's where the mockumentary format was particularly great, where you can have a guy tell a cameraman who is a person. He's telling a person because he doesn't want to lose face. He's going, yeah, these people are going to be here. And then one of the simplest keys of comedy, is contrast. So that's that contrast of that experience. But yeah, so we shot this short video, and the honest truth of it, which most people wouldn't realise, is that we thought it was really terrible. So we did nothing with it. And it just stayed somewhere until I think it was 2 years later. I think Michael found it, on his hard drive or something, and went, maybe if we change this a bit. And so I think we cut out a bunch of stuff out of it. It ended up becoming about 2 minutes. Put it online. In 3 days, it had 50,000 views. And suddenly we were like, okay, there's something to this. And we immediately realised it wasn't just hitting an audience in Tasmania. And for me, it was probably the first time that I'd really hit an audience with anything I'd created outside of Tasmania, because everyone around the country was going, this is just like, they're actually tagging their mates going, oh, this is just like Lyndon in Newcastle, or this is just like whatever. So we realised that there was something to it. And then that kind of started us on the journey of going, what would it look like to broaden this character, create a series, but we know it can hit online. So we need to have our audience in mind first before we create that.
So I'm really interested in how that series was broadened. Can
Yeah.
you talk a bit about, so you've got this film that you've created and you trim it down and it starts to get some interest and then what's the next step from there?
Yeah, one of the interesting things was we didn't know what to call it. So we were kind of going, what's going to grab people's attention online? So we called it Australia's Best Street Racer at that point. And what's fun about it is the title is obviously a joke because you click on it and you're like, okay, he's not at all Australia's Best Street Racer or whatever. So suddenly that kind of went, we actually thought, why not just lean into that? So we kind of realised that the show would be Australia's Best Street Racer, but at the same time we thought, there's no point creating content and then putting it online if it hasn't been specifically created with an online audience in mind. And so often, like to this day, we still see projects which are really great and really funny, but they haven't been shaped with the internet in mind first. And that's where, like, if you watch a Street Race episode today, the first 30 seconds is just like, it's going to grab you straight away because we want you to stick around. You're not going to see a title at the start, you're going to see it at the end when you actually care. We just don't want to distract anything. That's why we have episodes called How to Make Friends on Gumtree, because you read that and you go, what the flip? So that's the whole idea. So we kind of started effectively going, what are 8 stories we'd like to see the Street Racer character go on? And, almost adventures, because every episode kind of is a new adventure and a new opportunity to do something stupid. And straight away we started going, well, we've got a car, what if we modified it? Or what if we did it up on the inside? And then you start to ask more questions in the comedy writing process of going, well, why would he do it up? And he's like, of course he'd do it up because he'd want to pick up chicks. And the idea becomes quite organic when you know the character well, because you go, he wants a girlfriend, but yet again, he's a comedy character. He doesn't have the skills to get it. So what does picking up a girl look like to him? So in our story, if you watch the episode, like he, is on the other side of the nightclub, like on the other side of the road, using the speakers in his car to try and pick up chicks who are oblivious to him. So it kind of, we started to hone really into the audience, like what do, 18 to kind of 25-year-old people online engage with. We knew that the kind of car culture audience would be a really helpful booster. Without a doubt, I think anyone will enjoy Street Racer. But if you are one of those people, you'll just extra love it, I think. Honed in on that audience and then really started going, well, who is our character? What would he do? And also the fun of comedy is going, what kind of terrible situations do we want to throw him in? Let's what would it look like if someone breaks him or does something? And to be honest, from a writing perspective, Street Race episodes, other than so much time being put into writing jokes, we're just writing punchline after punchline. To be honest, that was the first month, just writing joke, because for me, my big thing is if I'm watching something that's advertised to me as a comedy and I'm not laughing, I'm like, it's not a comedy. It's got to be funny. And the great thing about Street Racer, he just delivers joke after joke to the cameraman because he's an idiot. So we really worked on that. But then the story structure is quite simple. It's Taylor decides to do up his car, it fails. End of story. Do you know what I mean? So when you dilute it, it's have we made the most simple thing ever? But in many ways, I think that's why people have really enjoyed it, because it's it's a simple concept, but which I think we've done well and in a way that's really funny. But like you said kind of before, highlighting a world that also, I think we grabbed a world that hadn't been exposed yet. But that is so universally understandable to Australians.
So when you construct these really short, really tight scripts, obviously your first impulse is that you're going for jokes per page at the highest octane that you can. Yeah. What is the process of working out whether comedy writing is funny or not? How do you know?
That's a good question. Well, one of the greatest things I love about what I do is I work with my creative partner, Michael O'Neill, and so we do the entire process together. And pretty much the rule of thumb is that, we both bring different talents to it, but we do everything together except he shoots and I act. I can't shoot for peanuts, and he certainly can't act, except you can hear his voice as the cameraman, so it's pretty good voiceover skills. But so the great thing about it is you do it together. And I think, like I talked about before, I think you have to understand that character first, because if something's really funny, that's great. But if your character wouldn't say it, it's not going in the script. Because all jokes, though you want them to be funny, if they don't make sense for the character, if they're not driving the story forward, they don't deserve to be there. But the great thing about doing it together is it's about making each other laugh. Do you know what I mean? It's going, you kind of say stuff, and for me, I come from a real joke writing background, so often Michael and I will be there and I'll just kind of be pitching some jokes, going, what if he says this? Also, this is where I go, sometimes the balance of like writing a character, directing a character and playing a character is really great because I already know, I know the voice, I know how would say it, he speaks in a very particular way, his grammar is terrible, he speaks very differently to me. So you're kind of keeping that in mind. But in regards to how it's funny, it is really the test of, does the other person laugh? So, but in saying that, it's still a big challenge to go, just because Michael laughs at the joke I wrote, doesn't mean the audience will laugh. And that's probably the great thing about learning to make content from kind of the age of 12, is you start just absolutely making things that you love. And over time you learn to go, where does what I love and where does what an audience loves come together? Because there's no point making some passion project thing that I think is amazing and no one else loves it, because I think the point of creating great content is so that people can enjoy it. So it's a lot of trial, and there's definitely times in the Street Racer process when we come back to a script and we go, this whole section is not funny enough. And then, you know, that's where the jokes have to come in. But surprisingly, like, people look at Street Racer and they think it's improvised. And even though the pilot was, it's not. Like, I think probably like 3%, like I can probably name like 6 jokes in the entire 8-episode season that are improvised. So it's a real lot of trial and error, and literally sitting down and going, okay, we're talking about girls. What are 50 things he could say about girls? And suddenly your mind starts racing and you go, oh, well, what would his mum say to him about girls? Like, some of his relationships help as well. And it's like, oh, what has he picked up from his dad? And suddenly you start throwing in these lines about he was conceived in a Kmart car park but he's proud of it, or, you know, like all these different things, and they start to flow.
Has there been any response to it as a series that has surprised you?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of funny things. One of the funniest things is that not everyone knows that it's not real, and which is a really great kind of treat for us, because we really made it with that in mind. Like, you can make a lot of different mockumentary choices, and like, it was something that happened with The Office, and, you know, shows like We Can Be Heroes, is that people would call up and complain. They go, these people are terrible, like, why are they on TV? So we definitely wanted it to feel like this is some guy just being filmed by some dude, and you might think that for the first 30 seconds, and then hopefully you realise. But honestly, you can check the YouTube comments and there are people going, this guy is a bleeping idiot, like, why would you film him, all this kind of stuff. But one of the funniest stories is through doing Street Racer was kind of where I started to get other acting work and doing some TV shows, and I had a lead role in a TV show called Sando for the ABC, and I still remember one of my first weeks there, one of the producers told me that one of the crew had come up to her and gone, tell you what, turns out that Dylan guy, it's actually quite bright. I thought he was like really dumb and stuff like that. And the producer had to be like, you realise like that Street Racer thing is like, it's written, like he's playing a character, and the person was like, oh, yeah, no, I know. So sometimes that's surprising, but probably some of the other things that have just been surprising, I think we always hoped, and I think I always had an inkling that we thought it would connect with people, but still the biggest challenge is just you create the show, and then the hardest job comes about, which is releasing the show, and you go, how do we get this to people? Are people actually going to watch this? Because otherwise it's for nothing. And Michael and I and our production company, we really challenge ourselves. We really want to do great work. And for us, there was a certain amount of views which we knew we needed to get to make it a success. And it, you know, ended up getting, 1.5 million views, which is incredible. But to answer your question, one of the biggest surprises there was we actually advertised the show through Facebook Marketplace. And how we did that was we fictitiously put the Barina from the show, the modified absolute piece of rubbish, we put it up for sale for $10,000, and that just went viral, just people going, we can't believe it, blah, blah, so that was something where it was quite a surprise to see how well people warmed to it. So in a way, I'm not surprised people loved it, because I'd always hoped they had, and we created it with them in mind. But it is still such a joy when you see a comment going, "Why isn't this on Netflix?" You know, I'm like, guys, I wish it was that easy, but thanks. I love that you love it.
Well, let's talk about the difference between the longer form work that you've done and the YouTube work that you've done, and whether you're more comfortable in one place or another. Are there any lessons that you've learned since kind of working on Sando and other programs like it?
Yeah, I think shows like that were really, on a practical level, they were really helpful for some of the work that we do, because we had kind of created our own set environment in regards to how we make things happen. But it's actually really helpful to see how greater sets happen and how you scale up, which is really, really great, because you don't always get those opportunities. And I hadn't at that point. I'd done a little bit of extra work outside of the kind of online stuff. But it definitely has pushed me in some ways in my dramatic range, I would say. But also sometimes I find it really hard, because I've come from a background of where I have created the character and I have written the character. And what that means is, to be honest, by the time it gets to the page, I have to do very little work in knowing what needs to be said, because it's already like, it's a bit lame, but it's like it's in my brain or it's in my heart. Like I know it intrinsically. Whereas sometimes it's hard when you're interpreting someone else's work to go, how do I nail this? And probably my experience has been is that sometimes you audition for a character and you go, absolutely, that's in my wheelhouse of lovable losers that I play. I can absolutely get that. But then I also have enjoyed the challenge of going, how do I do some bigger stuff or whatever? But to be honest, in some ways, the larger scale stuff, so doing something like Sando, which is like 6 30-minute episodes, in some ways it's not too similar when you're a part of a main cast, where you do a lot of, you might have your own scenes or your own adventures and stuff like that. But definitely one of the challenges was going, it is quite full on to go from just myself and a couple of people to suddenly there's a whole lot of people, and if I muck it up, people don't get lunch. Like it's an interesting from a challenge perspective. But for me, I just loved going in there and going, like I'm new to this, but I absolutely just want to give it the best that I can. And I hope that kind of came across in the work that I do outside of the online stuff.
When you work with your shorter form projects, I'm interested in the fact that you felt that Street Racer was quite Tasmanian initially, and it kind of became more universal.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a kind of comedy that is unique to this island?
That's a great question. I think there is. And I think where some of that comes across, and maybe it's not completely unique, but I think it does, it is a very us thing as Tasmanians, but I do think it travels and it translates as well, is I think there's this, we have a great opportunity and a great knack for, I think, focusing on stories that aren't, hey, I live in Sydney. Do you know what I mean? It's for me, it's part of the regional thing. And I think the chip on our shoulder sometimes comes through as well. And sometimes I really like that, because I think it can go two ways with young creatives. I think you can either go, oh, I've got to get out and I've got to leave to be able to do anything, or it actually pushes you to work harder. You go, I'm in a small space, I can work hard, I can go at this. But I think in a way we do have a unique tone. I think it is similar to the rest of the country, but it is definitely this kind of, more regional, the castle kind of expression. But I'd be interested to know what other people think. What do you think? Do you think there is?
I think, looking at your work, I think it really celebrates and maybe this is an Australian sense of humour, but I think it celebrates kind of the battler. It celebrates people who are stuck in mediocrity but dream for more. And I think that feels to me like kind of that idea from the classic line from Rosehaven. You couldn't hack it on the mainland. I think that's really heavily ingrained. I definitely feel that from your work. Yeah.
And I think on that as well, like one of the great things about working in that kind of container of Tasmania with the characters and stuff as well is like, I feel like all the characters I've created or worked on, they all have really big dreams, but to anyone else, they are so small. Do you know what I mean? Like none of the characters I ever want to build a rocket or change the world or solve, hunger or AIDS or anything like that. They're just like, I want to connect with my daughter, or I would just wish someone to call me, or I just wish I could hang out with someone in a car park. You know, like it's very small. I think in a way, sometimes that's what the Tassie and Australian spirit does really well, is it like you said, it does celebrate the battlers and go, you know, and the castle is a great example. You know, it's just about one house, but it's probably, I think, the greatest comedic story we've ever told. So.
And so what is the process for you when you write? How do you write? Are there particular rituals and amounts of time? Are there places that you insist on going to write? And particularly working with Michael, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes it's about how much we want to get done. And one of the great things about writing as a team is being very aware that there's a rhythm to it. So you'll have days where you absolutely will smash something, and then there are days where it's like, okay, no, we just have to go to KFC now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like there are those things like that. And also sometimes during that experience, you'll come up with, or you might come up with heaps of stuff, but you come up with one thing that may seem so small to anyone else. And for us, one of those things with Street Racer was about, what about if you use Gumtree? And like that was like, sounds like such a simple idea, but that day, like I often joke, it's like, okay, we can go home now. Like, do you mean, because that makes a really big difference. But yeah, we usually we do a lot over Zoom, especially now with coronavirus. We live in different places, so that's a big part of it. We get together, try and keep it casual. We're really good mates. Mike's my best mate. We have been for a while. So we try and keep that balance of going hard and going serious. And then we usually start with a synopsis, then outline, then script in that kind of format. And it kind of gets less fun as you go along. It gets harder. By the time you're like writing jokes, then you're like, this thing has to be shootable. But when you're just big story pictures, it's a lot easier. But yeah, we usually try and do, you know, during the day, get together or over Zoom and do big chunks, good break for lunch. We're always trying to move around as well. That's often something that when we are together, we'll do. Like we'll do a concentrated 2 hours together in an office space, maybe like where we are today. And then we'll go, now let's change the setup. Let's go for a drive. Let's do something. And it just keeps the conversation going, lighthearted. So I think finding good deadlines, but light pressure, I think is helpful.
There are a lot of kids out there who, like you, are probably in their cars filming little mockumentaries of their own and unsure what that might lead to. Do you have any advice for someone who's watching this thinking that's my dream is to climb into that YouTube space for real?
No, that's a great question. I think it's kind of very simple advice, but it's to work at it. So for me, I'm so thankful that as a young person, there were opportunities for me to develop the kind of talents and skills that I work in today. Like the fact that like as a kid, I was given shots to be able to do stuff, or I was able to use a camera, or, you know, things like that. Like that makes a big difference. And also I think what can often be forgotten if you're a bit younger is you can look at someone and, you know, I find this hard too. You can look at something and go, I want to be there tomorrow. But I know for me, I can absolutely track back and go, I can see where age 12 to 29, where I am now, I can see what that process has done. I worked with kids for a long time, all these different things, all of those things kind of shape and grow your ability. So I would probably say, like, work at it. And the other part of it is just do it. Like, even to be honest, in the industry that I work in television, often, especially on that lower scale, there are so many people that are, you know, kind of waiting for someone to go, okay, here's the money to make it happen. But from my experience, if people are going, how do I make this a career? It starts with you making something great. Do you know what I mean? Like not going, okay, how do I get a grant, or how do I make this happen? Or, oh, here's my great idea. Can you help me make it? Like the best thing you can do if you're interested and you're like 14 is just get mates, get cameras, study YouTube, study great films, great TV, build up your taste, learn what's great so that you can start to make great things as well. And at the end of the day, you just got to do it. And after all, there's like the biggest YouTube channel is like some 4-year-old in America. Like if him and his mum and dad can do it, like why can't you do it? Like to a certain degree, you do just have to like pull your finger out and go, yeah, I'm just going to make it happen. But the biggest advice I always give when I do chat to young people is find a friend to do it with. And that for me is something that I'm very thankful for. Because if I couldn't do this myself without a doubt. And what I do with my creative partner, Michael, everything is better as well because it's like two forces combined. We're like the Captain Planet of writing, I don't know. But so often people have this passion, but they don't necessarily know how to work it. But I'm like, if you can find someone else, then someone can hold a camera, someone can write do you know what I mean? You can put those talents together.
So your trajectory, 12 to 29, which you've tracked along beautifully, where do you see it taking you next?
Yeah.
Is Taylor going to come back, do you think, or are you going in a new direction?
Well, look, I really hope so. It's hard because I can't say too much, but we are definitely exploring more with the Taylor character. We want to try and do definitely a bit more before I'm too old to play 18-year-olds. That's definitely it. I think we will still and continue to be creating online content and things like that. But definitely the direction we want to be heading in is, and I know for me is TV and film and how some of our ideas can go to that next level. And to be honest, that's a big part of the challenge now is I've kind of a few years ago gone through that challenge of going, how can I get paid to do what I do and how can I find money to make stories that I'm passionate about? But it is a real jump to go, how do you go to that next level? And really a big part of my goal for, the next couple of years, but less so than the next 10 years is, for that just to be completely sustainable and to be able to do great stuff and to be able to work with other great Tasmanian people. But my dream and my hope is that in 10 years you'd be seeing really great, not just comedy movies, but really fantastic films and TV shows. And I'm sure even though they won't all be comedy, there'll be so much of that Tasmanian regional spirit that'll still be in there because, you can take the kid out of Tassie. You can't take the Tassie out of the kid, or to be honest, you'll probably struggle to get me out of Tasmania anyway. Why go somewhere else where you can do great stuff here and go for it?
Right. I'm sure a lot of people, after this interview, if they haven't watched Street Racer already, they'll go and watch it. If they have watched it, I hope they'll go and watch it again.
Yep.
And I just wonder, as we finish up, do you have any thoughts on what you would like people to take away from that series beyond the comedy itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess outside of the comedy, because my first thing would be I just hope people laugh so much because that was the goal. Every second is created so that hopefully people will lose their shit, just going crazy laughing. But probably my other thing, and this isn't something that we purposely go really deep on in the work, but I would hope that people would, think more about how they interact with the quiet, weird guy, the street racers in their lives. Because that's the thing, Street Racer is not a real person, but like we talked about at the start of the conversation, there are plenty of people like him and they just need a friend, So I'm not saying everyone has to suddenly become friends with everybody, but, I think if everyone had a bit more empathy and encouragement for one another, the world would definitely be a better place. And the other thing is if they could just, buy any single form of Street Racer merch, that would be really helpful. I've got a mortgage and...
Dylan Hesp, thank you so much for joining us on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast.
Thanks so much, Lyndon. It's been so much fun. Thanks for having me.
The Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast series is sponsored by Events Tasmania, M Visuals, and the award-winning Turner Steelhouse Distillery at Grindelwald, home of Three Cuts Gin, the perfect accompaniment to a night of reading. For more information on any books mentioned in this program, please visit Petrarch's, Launceston's major bookshop and a wonderful supporter of the Tamar Valley Writers Festival.